Hello, I'm Gary from Villa Muenchbach, Bed and Wine, and today I'm going to take you on a walk visiting the deserted village of Lopautal and along the Lopautal Valley. It's just over 10 kilometres long and will take you about 2 hours, though there are a couple of beautiful stops along the way to have a picnic or drinks and snacks. The walk starts on the small parking area at the end of the Lopauer Straße, coming from Wolfsorder. Emil Stender wrote about the area in 1925 in his book Wanderungen Hamburg, or Hikes Around Hamburg, pages 121 to 123. Through the Lopau Valley. I really shouldn't reveal how beautiful the Lopau Valley is, but so it is, because this is how I experienced it. When I was down there in the Uelzen region for the first time, long before the war, there was no lodging for weary hikers in Lopau, the small village on the stream of the same name. Only in the old schoolhouse were we hospitably welcomed and kindly entertained. Later, when I returned, the schoolhouse had been converted into a small hikers' hostel, zur Bachforelle. In English, the stream trout was written above it. I stayed here for a few days and got to know the surrounding area. I discovered many beautiful hidden spots in the farm, woods and forests, became familiar with foresters and villagers, sat for hours by fish ponds and waterways, and as I left, sang the praises of the beloved place on every path. And that was my downfall. Since then, the idyllic setting has become a much visited destination for excursions and recreation. Indeed, the dear old Bachforelle has closed its otherwise hospitable gates to me a few times, as my good friends and acquaintances had already settled there before me. They all had the same experience as me, those who were able to frolic for just a few days in the forest-lined meadows of the Lopau Valley, who were able to dream away the evenings by the fish ponds, listening to the gentle whispering of the reeds and rushes, and then retired to the rustling of the old village oaks, were drawn back there again and again. I would agree with his analysis, as it really is a beautiful area. We visited here on Easter Monday, where the weather was perfect, and there were only about 10 other cars parked here, so it's not as heavily visited as suggested in Stender's report. If you choose a work day, there would be even fewer people around. You have to check in advance if you can visit the village, as it's on military ground, and they sometimes train nearby, and therefore block access. I'll give a link in the description below where you can check accessibility. We went round the walk clockwise, which took in the lakes, then the village, through the forest, and then along the Lopau Valley. But you can, of course, go anti-clockwise and finish at the lakes. At the parking spot, there's an information board telling you which roads are blocked, but as said, it's best to check in advance. Head towards the signposted village and you'll see the lakes. Before the first one, head left along the path. There are actually two paths here, one that goes uphill slightly away from the lakes and the other closer to the lakeside. They both end up in the same place, so it doesn't really matter which one you take. We went directly along the lakeside path, and you immediately have some lovely views of the first lake. I've not been able to find out if these three lakes are natural or not, but there are a number of other lakes in the area which started out as man-made fish ponds, so maybe somewhere in their history they were created as lakes for fishing. At the end of the second lake, there's a sign for Karl August Wilmerweg. Karl August was elected chairman of the Munster Anglers Society in 1961 and leased the Lopau lakes for the society. You are allowed to go fishing in some of the lakes, but the numbers are restricted and you need a permit from the society in order to do so. The path leading around the third lake is the most beautiful, with plenty of views through the trees. This is just a short selection of some of the views. There's the perfect spot for a picnic at the far end, where we had a cup of flask tea and managed to eat our way through a whole bag of biscuits, whilst listening to the birds chirping and the wind in the trees. Continue up the west side of the lake for some more lovely views over the lakes, and at the end you'll come to the ghost village of Lopautal, with a brief description of the history of the village. The name Lopautal derives from the Low German word Lopen, meaning to flow, which would have referred to the river of the same name, which springs from the lakes we've just seen. As mentioned in Stender, Lopautal was a rather picturesque village before it was slightly spoilt by the tourists. The village was first mentioned in 1293 and from 1568 consisted of 3 farmsteads. Although the farmers had to pay heavy tithes to the convent in Ebstorf, they were nevertheless fairly well off. The village was plundered by the Swedish in the 30 Years' War between 1618 and 1648, and there was only a slow recovery after this with the advent of potato farming. With another bout of destruction during the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763, it prospered again after this with the help of the salt production centre in Lüneburg, which transported local wood. 2 of the 3 farmsteads were sold to the state at the end of the 1800s, with the third being acquired by the industrialist Richard Töpfer. Töpfer was born in 1840 in Stettin, in present-day Poland, the son of the owner of a large cement factory. He spent time in England working for John Fowler, an early industrial farming manufacturer, and came back to Germany a few years after, founding a successful steam plough company. The old farmhouse he acquired in 1895 was dilapidated and needed to be torn down. Instead, he converted a barn into his home, naming it his Heathland farmyard. The estate covered 3,000 acres, and he used the property to demonstrate his new agricultural machinery. He used the steam ploughs on the depleted soils to prepare for reforestation and arable farming. The result of the reforestation is what can be seen today. Töpfer died in 1919 in Magdeburg, and the estate was eventually sold to the state in 1922. At the end of the Second World War, at its peak, the village had a population of 276 with 13 houses. The number was swollen by refugees from the former German territories to the east, who were attracted to the area by the foundation of the military training area in nearby Munster in 1893. It was, however, the military camp that eventually led to the village's downfall. At the start of the 1970s, there were 62 villagers. With the expansion of the training area, the villagers were forced to move elsewhere, despite protests, with the final villagers moving out in 1983. Töpfer's beautiful Heathland farmyard was pulled down in 1978, along with 13 other houses, under the pretext of them being unstable, and what we see today are the remaining structures. If you, like us, are going round the route clockwise, the first building you'll come across is the old schoolhouse. The school was built in 1900, probably initiated by Töpfer, but it had already closed by 1963. It's worth having a look round the village at some of the other buildings, such as Haus Fangbeutel, which was used as a forestry office for the area. The only house which is still regularly used is Haus Schilling, which is used by the Forest Youth Group in Munster. From the village, there are a couple of options to continue your walk. You can finish here and head back to the parking area. You can head straight along the path heading north, or, like us, make a slight detour to the west. About halfway along the path to the left, you'll come across the Frog's Mouth Stone. All around the north of Germany there's evidence of its glacial past, where what's known in German as foundling stones, or in English the slightly less romantic name of glacial erratics, can be found dotted around the countryside. These are rocks which differ from local rocks and were transported by glacial ice, often distances over hundreds of kilometres. The Frog's Mouth Stone is one such rock, which was split in two by one of Töpfer's steam ploughs. Hermann Löns, who is a well-known local author, wrote about the stone saying, There lies a granite stone, which is a good 3 feet in diameter. The ploughshare split him in two. He lay here many tens of thousands of years, since the glacier from the far north pushed him here and finally set him down. A steam plough on the forest land belonging to Mr. Richard Tupfer split the stone whilst cultivating the heathland around 1900. The heath was ploughed to a depth of 55 to 65 centimetres. Stones many thousands pounds heavy were dug up from the earth, tree trunks and roots pulled out. This is a witness of the former power of machinery. Heading a little further along the path and then turning north, we made a cut back east along a small trail, which will be a real treat in mid to late summer, as it's full of wild blueberries. The area is in a nature reserve, but as long as you don't damage the plants, the fruit can be eaten. If you've only ever had shop-bought blueberries, the wild ones are smaller, darker and a little tartar, but packed with flavour and goodness. Follow the path which heads back to the north and then east again, where you'll join the path along the Lopautal Valley. Just a short way along the path north, you'll come across a tree which tells the story of Lopautal from its planting in 1854 till when it was cut down in 2011. The path continues north past more beautiful fish ponds and along a woodland path. At the north end of the walk, we continue past moss-covered woodland, some swampland areas, and then we get our first view of the Lopautal River. The east side of the Lopautal River is a particularly beautiful stretch. The narrow path meanders up and down hills, through more wild blueberries with views over the fields, and passes moss-covered tree trunks. This whole valley was formed between 400,000 and 140,000 years ago during the Saale glaciation period as a melt channel in the terminal moraines of the higher heathland. Terminal moraines are accumulations of debris that have been pushed there by the advancing glaciers, leaving large boulders such as the Frog's Mouth, which we saw earlier. A little further along the trail, we come across the Töpfer Tower, named after Richard Töpfer, who we spoke about previously. The present-day tower was built in the 1970s on the site of a former, much more impressive tower, which had unfortunately fallen into disuse. The Lopautal area had gradually been deforested over the centuries to supply wood to the salt manufacturers in Lüneburg, and it was thanks to Töpfer that the area was reforested. The tower was built as a gentleman's guest house and had wide views over the young trees and as far as the nearby town of Münster in the south. Continuing along the path southwards, we come to another couple of beautiful lakes. From here, there are a couple of options for the further walk. You can either loop round the first lake and follow the path further south back to the parking area, or head east along the south side of the second lake and along the quiet pathway, with only the trees and the birds singing to accompany you. I hope you enjoyed this trip. If you want to find out more about our holiday apartments, then check out our website, where you'll also find a link to further walks, places of interest and recommendations for places to eat, which are all less than an hour away from us in the middle of the heathland.